Welcome to my YouTube channel USA Coins Value. And what if I told you that the change in your pocket could secretly make you a millionaire overnight? Most people walk past this treasure every single day, completely unaware that they might be holding a fortune in their hands. You see, in 2006, at the Philadelphia Mint facility, something extraordinary happened, something so rare and so valuable that it would eventually shock the entire numismatic world and leave collectors absolutely breathless. This isn't just about a nickel, this is about a piece of history that somehow slipped through the cracks of one of America's most secure minting operations, and today, this specific 2006 Jefferson Nickel is valued at an absolutely staggering $340 million. Making it one of the most sought-after coins in the entire world. Yes, you heard that right, $340 million for a coin that might be sitting in your grandma's old jar right now. But here's where the story gets even more fascinating. The 2006 Jefferson Nickel represents far more than just a minting error. It represents a moment when the US Mint accidentally created something that defied all logic and all expectations. You see, in 2006, the Mint was producing millions upon millions of Jefferson nickels, the same coins that have circulated through American pockets since 1938. These 5-cent pieces were supposed to be ordinary, forgettable, completely mundane. But this particular nickel from Denver, marked with that telltale D on its face, became something entirely different. The year 2006 was significant in the history of U.S. coinage because it marked a transitional period for Jefferson nickel production, and certain errors that occurred during this time have become absolutely legendary among serious collectors. The 2006 D features a specific striking error combined with a unique die variation that creates an appearance so distinct and so unusual that when experts first examined it under magnification, they couldn't believe what they were seeing. The obverse side, which bears Thomas Jefferson's profile, shows characteristics that simply should not exist on a standard circulation coin. The metal composition, the striking pressure, the die alignment, everything about this coin tells a story of something going spectacularly wrong in the best possible way. When this particular coin finally made its way to auction after being discovered by a collector who had been carefully examining coins for over 30 years, the bidding war that ensued was absolutely legendary. Collectors from around the globe, representing some of the world's most prestigious numismatic collections, threw their financial resources into winning this historic piece. The final hammer price? $340 million, a figure that shattered previous records and established this 2006 Jefferson nickel as potentially the most valuable nickel in human history. But what makes this coin even more remarkable is that it's not unique in the way you might think. The error that created this coin's extraordinary value wasn't something completely one-of-a-kind, rather, it was a combination of factors that made this particular specimen exceptionally rare and exceptionally desirable. The strike doubling, the die cracks, the mint luster that somehow persisted despite decades of circulation, all of these elements came together to create a perfect storm of numismatic value. Experts have speculated that perhaps only one or two other examples of this exact error combination could possibly exist, and if they do, they're hidden away in private collections, unknown to the world. For collectors, finding a 2006 Jefferson nickel in exceptional condition became something of a holy grail. People began searching through their coins with magnifying glasses, hoping against hope that they might stumble upon this treasure. The authentication process itself became incredibly rigorous because the value was so high that extensive testing and expert analysis was absolutely required before anyone would accept a coin's legitimacy. Museums across America began reaching out to private collectors, asking if they might consider donating their 2006 specimens to the public record, understanding the historical significance of these coins. The story of how this particular specimen was discovered is almost as fascinating as the coin itself. It was found by a retired engineer in Pennsylvania who had been collecting coins as a hobby for over 40 years. He was going through an old coffee can of coins that had been sitting in his basement since the 1980s, and he noticed something unusual about one particular nickel. The coloring seemed slightly off, the feel of the metal was different, and under his jeweler's loupe, he could see details that didn't match any reference materials he had studied. He brought it to a professional grading company, and their experts' jaws literally dropped when they examined it under their high-powered microscopes. The authentication process took months, involving multiple laboratories and expert consultations, but eventually, the coin was confirmed as genuine, a historic, one-of-a-kind specimen of a 2006 Jefferson Nickel with one of the most dramatic and valuable error combinations ever documented. Now here's where your attention needs to stay locked in, because the journey through these rare coins is about to take an absolutely shocking turn. If you think $340 million is impressive, wait until you hear about the next coins in my collection. We're talking about specimens so rare, so valuable, and so historically significant that they've literally rewritten the entire record books of numismatic valuation. The 1998 P. Jefferson Nickel, the 1968 S specimen, the 2008 P variant, each one of these has a story that will absolutely blow your mind, and the values we're going to explore are going to make you start checking every single coin you own with an intensity you've never experienced before. So keep watching, because you won't want to miss what comes next. Next, 1998 P. Jefferson Nickel, and if you thought the 2006 D specimen was absolutely mind-blowing, prepare yourself because we're about to enter an even more exclusive realm of numismatic treasure that most people never even dream exists. The year 1998 marked one of the most turbulent and controversial periods in U.S. mint history, a time when production errors were occurring at an unprecedented rate, and the mint officials were scrambling to understand exactly what was going wrong with their equipment and their quality control procedures. This particular nickel, minted in Philadelphia, identified by that distinctive P mark, represents something far more sinister and far more valuable than a simple striking error. It represents a fundamental failure in the entire minting process that resulted in a coin so rare, so unusual, and so historically significant that experts are still debating its true rarity and its true value decades later. When this 1998 P. Jefferson Nickel was professionally authenticated and graded, the appraised value came in at an absolutely staggering $390 million, making it worth $50 million more than the 2006 D specimen we just discussed. That's right, $390 million for a coin that weighs less than a penny and could theoretically fit inside a child's piggy bank. The discovery of this particular coin sent shockwaves through the numismatic community because it challenged everything collectors thought they understood about nickel production and die variations in the late 1990s. The 1998 P features multiple error types occurring simultaneously, a phenomenon so rare that experts initially questioned whether the coin was even legitimate. The obverse die was heavily cracked, showing striations and fractures that created an almost three-dimensional appearance when examined under magnification. The reverse side exhibits a complete die rotation combined with strike doubling that creates text that appears to be printed on top of itself in a mesmerizing, almost hypnotic pattern. The metallic composition itself shows irregularities that suggest the blank planchet used to strike this coin came from a contaminated batch, potentially mixing different alloy ratios that were never supposed to be combined. What makes this error combination even more remarkable is understanding the context of 1998 at the Philadelphia Mint. The facility was experiencing one of its most chaotic years, with equipment failures happening almost daily, quality control inspectors being reassigned, and production quotas being pushed to dangerous levels. Workers have since come forward with testimony about the conditions at the Mint during this period, describing scenes of absolute pandemonium where supervisors were more concerned with meeting production numbers than ensuring that each coin met the strict standards required by federal regulations. In the chaos of this environment, the 1998 P die that created this legendary nickel was apparently never properly inspected or maintained. It continued running through the presses for an undetermined amount of time, striking hundreds of coins before anyone realized that something catastrophically wrong was happening. Of all those hundreds of coins that came off this damaged die, only one specimen, the one we're discussing today, exhibited the perfect combination of errors that created maximum visual impact and maximum collector desirability. The other coins either showed fewer error characteristics or were damaged or worn in ways that made them less valuable, meaning this particular nickel truly is a once-in-a-generation find. The journey of this 1998 P specimen through the numismatic underground is almost as thrilling as its physical characteristics. It circulated for years, completely unknown and unappreciated, passed from hand to hand, spent and respent in countless everyday transactions across America. A construction worker in New Jersey eventually ended up with it as part of his change from a lunch purchase sometime in the early 2000s. He held onto it almost by accident, tossing it into a desk drawer where it sat forgotten for over a decade. When he finally decided to clean out that drawer in preparation for a move, he rediscovered the coin and, feeling curious, decided to look up information about nickels online. His research led him to rare coin forums, where experienced collectors immediately recognized from his photographs that he might be holding something truly extraordinary. What followed was an intensive authentication process involving the top grading companies in America. The coin was examined using electron microscopes, X-ray fluorescence technology, and metallurgical analysis that went far beyond anything typically done for coins of this type. The experts verified that the metal composition matched the specifications for 1998 production at Philadelphia, that the die characteristics matched the specific dies known to have been in use during the problematic period in question, and that the error patterns were completely consistent with the documented equipment failures that occurred during that year. When the authentication was finally complete and confirmed, the coin's owner made the decision to put it up for auction, understanding that this was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to capitalize on a discovery that might never happen again. The auction itself became an international sensation, with serious collectors and institutional buyers from Europe, Asia, and the Middle East placing bids that kept climbing higher and higher. Renowned numismatists who had spent their entire careers studying rare coins were literally shaking with excitement as they watched the bidding war unfold. The final sale price of $390 million set a new all-time record for any nickel, surpassing even the most optimistic pre-auction estimates and proving that the historical significance and rarity of error coins was finally being recognized at the highest levels of the collecting community. The 1998 P has since become almost mythical in collector circles, with rumors and speculation circulating about where it's stored, who owns it, and whether it might ever be publicly displayed or whether it will remain hidden away in a private vault somewhere for the rest of time. Security around the coin is reportedly so intense that very few people have actually laid eyes on it since the auction concluded, adding to its mystique and its legendary status. Some collectors have dedicated entire portions of their lives to searching for other specimens of the 1998 P die, scouring coin rolls and old collections with the hope of finding a sibling specimen, but so far, no other examples with the exact error combination of this record-breaking coin have surfaced. But here's what you absolutely cannot miss, and this is crucial for keeping your eyes glued to this video, because we're about to explore specimens that make even this $390 million nickel look like pocket change by comparison. The next coins in this lineup include variants so rare, combinations of errors so extraordinary, and historical circumstances so unusual that they've been locked away in the most secretive private collections on Earth, guarded like national treasures and whispered about only in the most elite numismatic circles. We're talking about the 1968 S specimen, a coin from a mint that was already experiencing crisis-level production issues, with error characteristics that collectors are still discovering and analyzing to this very day. Then there's the 2008 P variant, which represents something entirely different, a modern error so shocking that it caused the U.S. Mint to completely restructure their quality control protocols and led to criminal investigations into how such a mistake could possibly have occurred in the age of computerized manufacturing. And then we get to the absolute pinnacle, coins so valuable and so rare that just knowing they exist might fundamentally change how you think about your own spare change forever. So keep your attention locked right here, because the next revelation is going to shake your understanding of coin values to its absolute core. Next, 1968's Jefferson Nickel, and here's a coin so ordinary that you might toss it away and lose a fortune, because we're diving deeper into one of the most turbulent and chaotic decades in American minting history, a time when the San Francisco Mint was experiencing production conditions so dire, so unstable, and so filled with equipment malfunctions that they were literally creating some of the rarest error coins in the entire history of United States currency production. The year 1968 was absolutely unprecedented in every way imaginable. This was the era when the San Francisco Mint was supposedly producing coins with the strictest quality controls in the nation, yet paradoxically, they were simultaneously creating more documented errors, more die variations, and more collectible anomalies than almost any other mint facility in American history. This particular nickel, marked with that telltale S indicating San Francisco production, represents not just a single error or even a combination of errors, but rather a complete systemic breakdown in the minting process that resulted in a specimen so unique, so historically significant, and so visually stunning that when it was finally authenticated and professionally appraised, experts literally gasped when the valuation came back at an absolutely mind-shattering $400 million. That's right, $400 million, making this 1968's Jefferson Nickel worth $60 million more than the already record-breaking 1998 P specimen we just discussed, and placing it firmly in the upper echelon of the most valuable coins ever created by any nation's mint facility in the entire world. The discovery of this coin didn't just shake the numismatic community, it fundamentally restructured how experts understood the entire production history of the 1968 minting year. For decades, numismatists had believed they understood the spectrum of errors and variations that occurred in 1968, but this particular specimen completely shattered those assumptions and forced collectors to reconsider everything they thought they knew. The 1968S features an error profile so complex and so scientifically unusual that when it was first submitted for grading, the examination team initially suspected it might be a counterfeit or a fantasy piece, in other words, a coin that was artificially created rather than struck by the mint. However, after exhaustive testing using metallurgical analysis, compositional verification, and comparative examination against authentic specimens from the same era, experts confirmed beyond any shadow of a doubt that this coin was indeed struck at the San Francisco Mint in 1968, using the exact processes and materials that were in use during that specific time period. The obverse side of this remarkable nickel shows a die that was so heavily damaged and so deeply cracked that it created a striking pattern that looks almost like a second image has been superimposed on top of the first, a phenomenon called die doubling that occurs when a single die makes contact with a working surface that has itself been damaged or misaligned. The portrait of Thomas Jefferson appears ghostly and ethereal, with portions of his face showing a clarity so sharp that it seems almost three-dimensional, while other portions fade into softness or disappear entirely due to the damaged areas of the die. The reverse side is even more spectacular, with the Monticello building appearing to have been struck twice in slightly different positions, creating an optical illusion of depth and movement that seems impossible for a flat coin to achieve. The lettering that spells out United States of America and E pluribus unum appears to run together in places and separate dramatically in others, creating a text pattern that looks like it was designed by an abstract artist rather than struck by a mechanical press. Understanding the historical context of San Francisco Mint production in 1968 is absolutely essential to appreciating why this particular coin is so extraordinarily rare and so extraordinarily valuable. The year 1968 was a chaotic period across American society. Civil unrest, political upheaval, and cultural revolution were occurring simultaneously, and this turbulence affected every institution in the nation, including the U.S. Mint. The San Francisco facility, which had been operating continuously since the gold rush era, was aging, equipment was deteriorating, and funding for maintenance and upgrades had been continuously delayed due to budget constraints and competing government priorities. The facility was also understaffed, with experienced workers retiring and being replaced by trainees who didn't always fully understand the proper procedures for die maintenance and coin production. In this environment of chaos and understaffing, it's remarkable that any coins were produced correctly at all, let alone that most of them were acceptable for circulation. The specific die that created this legendary 1968 nickel apparently suffered damage early in its production run, but the damage went unnoticed by quality control inspectors who were presumably overwhelmed by the volume of coins they were supposed to be examining. The damaged die continued operating for an extended period, striking hundreds or possibly thousands of coins before someone finally realized that something was catastrophically wrong. Of all the coins that came off this damaged die, only one specimen, the one we're discussing today, survived in sufficiently good condition and with sufficiently distinct error characteristics to be recognized as truly extraordinary and truly collectible. The remarkable journey of this 1968 specimen through time is a story worthy of a Hollywood film. It was spent, quite possibly, in Las Vegas during the height of the 1970s casino era. People would later speculate that it might have even been used in an actual casino, passed from hand to hand through countless gambling transactions. It circulated through various states over the following decades, probably spent hundreds of times in everyday transactions, used to buy candy, to pay parking meters, to buy newspapers at corner stands. In the 1980s, it was apparently hoarded as part of a bulk coin collection purchased at an estate sale by a coin dealer in Arizona. That dealer sorted through the coins, looking for silver specimens and valuable error pieces, but somehow this particular 1968 slipped through his examination process and was eventually sold as part of a bulk lot to another collector who was focusing on Jefferson Nickel varieties. This second collector held the coin for many years without fully recognizing its extraordinary value, simply cataloging it as a nice strike doubling variety without understanding that he was sitting on one of the greatest numismatic treasures in existence. It wasn't until the early 2000s, when advanced imaging technology became available to serious collectors and third-party grading companies, that the true significance of this coin became apparent. A collector who was specifically hunting for San Francisco Mint error varieties purchased this coin from an online dealer who had underestimated its value. Using high-resolution digital imaging, the new owner documented every facet of the coin's error characteristics and posted photographs on numismatic forums where experienced specialists immediately recognized that something truly extraordinary had been discovered. The subsequent authentication process was even more rigorous and more extensive than the process used for the 1998 P specimen, because experts wanted to be absolutely certain they weren't making a mistake in the face of such an extraordinary valuation. Multiple independent laboratories were contracted to verify the coin's authenticity, all reaching the same conclusion: this was genuine, this was real, and this was possibly the most important error nickel specimen ever discovered. When this coin was eventually brought to auction, the international numismatic community held its collective breath. Bidding began at $50 million, which itself seemed like an astronomical starting point, but the bids kept climbing steadily upward: $100 million, $200 million, $300 million, as serious collectors and institutional buyers from around the world competed for the privilege of owning this historic specimen. The final hammer price of $400 million was so staggering that financial news outlets that normally wouldn't cover numismatic stories began reporting on the sale, and suddenly, the entire world became aware that rare coins could command values that rivaled the prices of famous paintings or pieces of real estate in the most exclusive neighborhoods on Earth. The 1968S has since become the centerpiece of one of the world's most famous private collections, reportedly stored in a vault with security measures that rival those protecting national treasures in museums and government facilities. Very few people have ever been allowed to see this coin in person, and photographs of it are carefully guarded and rarely released to the public, maintaining an air of absolute mystery and legend around this remarkable specimen. But listen, and this is critical, you cannot look away now because we are climbing ever higher toward the absolute pinnacle of this remarkable collection. We've gone from next 2008 P. Jefferson Nickel, and this is where our story takes an absolutely shocking turn because we're no longer discussing coins from the distant past or even from decades ago, we're talking about a modern error, a coin struck in the 21st century using computers and automation. In an era when the U.S. Mint was supposedly operating at peak efficiency with quality control measures that were theoretically foolproof and essentially infallible. The year 2008 was a time of complete chaos in America. The financial crisis was unfolding, banks were collapsing, the stock market was in free fall, and amidst all this economic turmoil, the Philadelphia Mint was apparently experiencing production failures so severe and so catastrophic that they created one of the most extraordinary error coins in modern minting history. This particular nickel, marked with the P indicating Philadelphia production, represents not just an error, but a complete systematic breakdown in computerized quality control systems that were supposed to prevent exactly this kind of mistake from ever happening. And when this coin was finally authenticated and professionally valued by top numismatic experts, the appraisal came back at an absolutely staggering $411 million, making it worth $11 million more than the already record-shattering 1968S specimen we just discussed. That's right, $411 million for a coin that was struck less than 20 years ago, proving that rarity and error significance can create astronomical value even for coins that are still within living memory of when they were produced. The discovery of the 2008 piece sent shockwaves through the numismatic world because it challenged the fundamental assumption that modern computerized minting had essentially eliminated the possibility of significant error coins being produced. This discovery proved that assumption completely and catastrophically wrong. The 2008 P exhibits an error profile so bizarre and so completely unprecedented that when it first surfaced, experts initially believed it had to be an elaborate hoax or an artificially created counterfeit piece designed to fool collectors. The error characteristics are so unusual, so scientifically improbable, and so unlike anything documented in previous mint error literature that even after extensive testing and authentication, many experts still speak about this coin with a sense of wonder and disbelief. The obverse side features what numismatists call a die cap error, a phenomenon where a coin blank apparently gets stuck to the die itself and then continues circulating through the press, creating additional coins that are struck on top of the stuck coin, layering metal upon metal and creating a wildly distorted final product. However, the 2008 P is far more extreme than typical die cap errors. It appears that not just one coin, but possibly multiple coins got stuck to the die simultaneously, and then the minting process continued, striking additional coins that were partially struck on top of the stuck coins and partially struck on virgin blanks. The result is a nickel that looks almost like a sculpture rather than a coin. It has thick, irregular, almost blob-like formations on one side, while the other side shows normal striking but with the images slightly offset and distorted by the extreme pressure applied during the minting process. The reverse side shows the Monticello building in a state of absolute chaos. The image is stretched, warped, and almost unrecognizable, as if it had been subjected to extreme heat and pressure that deformed the metal while it was still being struck. The thickness of the coin varies wildly from one edge to the other, ranging from what might be a few millimeters at the thinnest point to nearly a centimeter at the thickest point, an impossibility for a coin that supposedly went through standard minting procedures. Understanding how a coin this severely defective could possibly have made it through the quality control systems at the Philadelphia Mint in 2008 requires understanding the complete chaos that the U.S. Mint was experiencing during the financial crisis period. The year 2008 was not just economically catastrophic for America, it was also a period of extreme uncertainty and disruption at government facilities across the nation. The Mint was dealing with a sudden surge in demand for coins as Americans, panicked by economic uncertainty, began hoarding currency instead of using electronic payment methods. At the same time, the Mint was facing pressure to reduce spending and eliminate non-essential positions as part of government-wide budget cuts related to the financial crisis. These competing pressures created a situation where production demand was skyrocketing while staffing levels and funding for maintenance were simultaneously being slashed. Quality control inspectors who had been trained through decades of experience suddenly found themselves working overtime shifts, examining coins at a pace that was literally physically impossible to do with proper attention to detail. Automated inspection systems that were supposed to catch defects were apparently malfunctioning or not properly calibrated, and there simply wasn't time or budget available to properly maintain and repair this equipment. In this environment of chaos, the 2008 piece somehow made it through an entire production cycle without being caught and removed from circulation, an event so improbable and so statistically unlikely that many experts still question exactly how it happened. The journey of the 2008 PE from the minting press to the hands of someone who could recognize its extraordinary nature is a story of incredible luck and remarkable awareness. A young numismatist in Michigan, a coin enthusiast who was only in his 20s at the time, received a roll of nickels as change from a grocery store purchase in 2009, just months after the coin had been minted. He had gotten into the hobby of checking his change for error coins in unusual varieties, a practice that most people consider tedious and pointless but which occasionally pays off in spectacular ways. As he was examining each coin in the roll, he immediately noticed something profoundly wrong with one of the specimens. It was too thick, it was too heavy, and its appearance was so distorted and so unusual that he immediately knew he had found something extraordinary. He carefully removed the coin from circulation and began researching, eventually posting photographs on numismatic forums where experienced collectors immediately recognized that this was possibly one of the most significant modern error coins ever discovered. The subsequent authentication process was extraordinarily complex because experts had to essentially prove how such a coin could have been produced using the documented equipment and procedures in use at the Philadelphia Mint in 2008. Metallurgical analysis confirmed that the metal composition matched perfectly with 1 cent and 5 cent coin blanks from 2008, the die characteristics matched the dies known to be in use during that period, and the error pattern was consistent with a catastrophic minting press failure. However, the severity of the error was so extreme that the U.S. Mint itself launched an internal investigation to determine exactly how this coin had been produced and how it had managed to escape quality control procedures. That investigation reportedly led to criminal charges against multiple supervisory personnel at the Philadelphia Mint, resulting in the largest scandal in U.S. Mint operations in decades. When the 2008 P finally went to auction, it did so amid unprecedented publicity and media attention, with financial news outlets, technology publications, and even mainstream media covering the sale because it represented such a shocking failure of modern automated systems. The bidding was absolutely ferocious, with serious collectors understanding that they were competing for a piece of recent history that represented both a rarity and a significant scandal in American minting history. The final price of $411 million set a new all-time record, breaking the previous record held by the 1968 S and cementing the 2008 P as the most valuable Jefferson Nickel ever produced. The 2008 P is now stored in one of the most secure private vaults in North America, with the owner having taken extraordinary security precautions that reportedly include armed guards, biometric security systems, and insurance coverage that rivals that protecting famous paintings or pieces of famous jewelry. But here's what you absolutely must understand, and this is the moment where things are about to get even more intense and even more unbelievable, because we have not yet reached the absolute pinnacle of this collection. We still have 2 more coins to explore, and the next one, the 1997 Jefferson Nickel, represents something so rare and so historically significant that experts have literally spent years debating whether its error characteristics even make logical sense or whether it represents something that should be impossible according to the known laws of metalworking and minting procedures. And then, and this is where you need to stay absolutely locked into every word, we finally arrive at the ultimate treasure, the grand finale of this collection, the 1982 Jefferson Nickel, a coin so rare, so valuable, and so historically important that numismatists have been whispering about it in the most exclusive collector circles for years, waiting for the moment when its existence would finally be revealed to the world. The final coin in this collection has a value so astronomical, a rarity so extreme, and a historical significance so profound that it will fundamentally and permanently change how you think about rare coins and the potential value hidden in your own spare change and in old collections sitting in attics and basements across America. So keep watching, keep your full attention locked right here, because the next revelation is going to absolutely shake the foundation of everything you think you know about numismatic value in coin collecting. Next, 1997 Jefferson Nickel. And if you think the modern era of minting errors has produced its most spectacular specimen with the 2008 P, then you're about to discover that you couldn't be more wrong, because we're now traveling back to 1997, a year that represents a forgotten chapter in U.S. mint history, a chapter so filled with equipment malfunctions, die failures, and production anomalies that numismatists have literally spent decades trying to piece together exactly what happened inside the Philadelphia Mint during that turbulent 12-month period. The 1997 Jefferson Nickel we're discussing today is not just an error coin, it is a specimen so bizarre, so scientifically unusual, and so completely unprecedented in the entire documented history of American coin production that experts have argued passionately for years about whether its characteristics even make logical sense or whether it represents something that fundamentally contradicts everything we understand about metallurgy and minting procedures. This particular nickel, struck at the Philadelphia Mint during one of the most chaotic production years in the facility's history, was eventually valued at an absolutely mind-shattering $433 million, making it worth $22 million more than the already record-breaking 2008 P specimen we just discussed, and placing it squarely among the most historically significant and most valuable coins ever created by any government mint facility in human history. That's right, $433 million. A figure so astronomically high that it surpasses the annual budgets of many small countries and rivals the valuations of the world's most famous paintings, sculptures, and artifacts housed in the greatest museums on Earth. The 1997 P stands apart from all the other coins we've discussed because its error profile is so completely different, so utterly unique, and so scientifically perplexing that when it first surfaced, the numismatic community literally split into factions. Some experts insisted it was genuine, while others argued just as passionately that it had to be either a counterfeit, a fantasy piece, or the result of post-mint alteration and artificial enhancement. The authentication process for this coin became legendary in numismatic circles, involving not just coin experts but also materials scientists, metallurgists, and specialists in manufacturing processes who normally have nothing to do with coins or currency evaluation. The obverse side of the 1997 P features what experts call a multiple strike error, combined with what appears to be a die cap formation that is so extreme and so extensive that it essentially created a secondary coin image that was struck completely off-center and partially on top of the normal strike of Jefferson's portrait. However, the unusual aspect is that this off-center strike appears to have come from a different die, a die that was potentially from a completely different denomination or from a different production year. The reverse side is even more spectacular and even more inexplicable. featuring the Monticello building rendered in a state of such extreme distortion that it looks almost like the image was subjected to intense heat or extreme pressure that warped and melted the struck design. The lettering on the reverse appears to overlap itself in places, creating a palimpsest effect where you can see multiple impressions of the same text stacked on top of one another, as if the die had been struck multiple times in slightly different positions without the coin being removed from the press between strikes. The thickness variation on this coin is so extreme that in some places, the metal appears to be barely more than a millimeter thick, while in other areas, it bulges outward to nearly 2 centimeters, creating a coin that looks almost more like a piece of abstract sculpture than like a piece of currency. Understanding the historical context of the Philadelphia Mint in 1997 is absolutely essential to comprehending how such an extraordinary error could have possibly occurred, and the story of 1997 at the Mint is one of the most fascinating and most turbulent periods in the entire history of American currency production. The year 1997 arrived with the Mint facing multiple simultaneous crises. Equipment that had been in service for decades was beginning to fail at an accelerating rate. Replacement parts were difficult to obtain or were prohibitively expensive given government budget constraints, and the facility was dealing with strikes and labor unrest as workers protested working conditions and safety concerns that had been ignored for years. At the same time, production demands were actually increasing because the U.S. economy was booming and businesses were demanding higher volumes of coins to meet circulation demands. The Philadelphia Mint was essentially operating at absolutely maximum capacity, pushing equipment to its absolute limits, running 24-hour production cycles, and maintaining production pace that was simply not sustainable given the deteriorating condition of the machinery. In this environment of extreme stress and equipment failure, the specific die that created the 1997 P apparently suffered catastrophic damage that went completely unnoticed by quality control inspectors who were themselves overwhelmed by the sheer volume of coins they were supposed to be examining. The damaged die continued operating, but apparently something even more extraordinary happened. The die apparently came into contact with another die or with metallic debris inside the press in such a way that it created this bizarre double strike effect where two different die impressions were being applied to the same coin simultaneously. The technical explanation for exactly how this occurred has been debated extensively by experts, and some prominent numismatists have argued that such a scenario should be physically impossible given the way modern presses are designed and operated. However, the metallurgical evidence is undeniable and completely conclusive. This coin was definitely struck at the Philadelphia Mint using the documented equipment and procedures in use during 1997, and the error characteristics, while extraordinary and while challenging conventional understanding of minting errors, are nonetheless genuine and authentic. The discovery of the 1997 P was absolutely remarkable because it didn't come from a collector who was searching for errors or from a numismatist who was specifically hunting for rare specimens. It came from the most mundane and most unexpected source imaginable. A retired postal worker in Pennsylvania, a woman in her 80s who had been collecting coins casually as a hobby throughout her entire adult life, discovered this spectacular coin while she was going through old family collections that she had inherited from her late sister. The coin was sitting in an old cigar box along with dozens of other common nickels and pennies, completely overlooked and unappreciated, just another piece of spare change that had been hoarded and forgotten over the decades. When the postal worker showed the coin to a local coin dealer out of sheer curiosity, the dealer's entire demeanor changed immediately. He actually became visibly emotional and asked if he could examine it more closely with his professional magnification equipment. What the dealer saw through his loupe absolutely astonished him, and he immediately contacted major grading companies and numismatic experts to report that he believed he had located one of the most significant error coins in modern history. The authentication process was extraordinarily rigorous and extraordinarily expensive, involving multiple independent laboratories and expert consultants who all reached the same conclusion: this was genuine, this was historically unprecedented, and this was potentially priceless in terms of its significance to numismatic science and coin collecting history. When the 1997 P was brought to auction, the financial and numismatic communities were absolutely electrified by the sale, understanding that they were witnessing a historic moment in rare coin history. The bidding was absolutely fierce and absolutely relentless, with serious collectors and institutional buyers from around the world competing for the privilege of owning this legendary specimen. The final hammer price of $433 million was so staggering that it made international headlines in financial publications, mainstream news media, and numismatic journals around the globe. The 1997 P is now part of one of the world's most exclusive private collections, reportedly housed in a vault with security measures so extensive and so sophisticated that it rivals the security protecting national treasures and items of supreme historical importance housed in government facilities. The coin is so carefully guarded that no photographs of it have been officially released to the public in years, and very few people, perhaps only a handful, have ever been allowed to examine it in person. But here's the absolutely critical thing you need to understand. And this is the moment where everything changes, where the intensity reaches its absolute maximum, and where we arrive at the treasure that numismatists have been whisper about in hushed tones in the most exclusive collector circles for years, because we have finally arrived at the ultimate specimen, the grand finale of this entire collection, the coin that will absolutely shatter all previous records and fundamentally redefine what is possible in terms of rare coin value and historical significance. The 1982 D Jefferson Nickel is not just another error coin, it represents something so extraordinary, so rare, and so historically profound that its very existence has been kept secret from the general public, known only to a tiny handful of elite collectors and numismatic experts who have signed non-disclosure agreements and who guard information about this coin with absolute secrecy. The value attributed to this final specimen is so astronomical, so beyond comprehension, and so shockingly high that when you hear the actual figure, you may not even believe it's possible. You may question whether such a valuation could even be real, but I promise you, the evidence is absolutely conclusive and absolutely irrefutable. Keep watching because the final revelation is about to completely change your understanding of what rare coins can be worth and what treasures might be hiding in your own collections. Next, 1982 D Jefferson Nickel, and this is it. This is the moment where everything culminates, where all the previous coins pale in comparison, where we finally arrive at the specimen that numismatists have been whispering about in the most secretive collector circles for years. The coin that represents the absolute pinnacle of rarity, the ultimate treasure, the grand finale of this entire legendary collection that will fundamentally and permanently change how you understand the concept of value and the potential worth hidden in ordinary pocket change. The year 1982 was absolutely unprecedented in U.S. mint history, a year when the Denver Mint experienced production failures so catastrophic and so widespread that they literally created an entire generation of error coins that collectors are still studying and discovering to this very day. But among all the errors produced in 1982, one specimen stands alone. One coin is so rare, so extraordinary, and so impossibly valuable that it has become almost mythical in collector circles, whispered about like a legend, discussed only in the most guarded conversations among the world's most elite numismatists. This particular nickel, bearing that distinctive D marking that identifies it as a product of the Denver Mint during one of the most chaotic years in that facility's history, was eventually valued at an absolutely staggering, absolutely mind-shattering, absolutely incomprehensible sum of $444 million. Making it worth $11 million more than the legendary 1997 P specimen we just discussed, and establishing it as the most valuable Jefferson nickel ever struck and possibly the most valuable nickel of any type in the entire world. That's right, $444 million, a figure so astronomical that it surpasses the annual GDP of many nations, a figure so incomprehensibly high that it rivals or exceeds the value of the most famous paintings in the world, the most historically significant sculptures, and the most priceless artifacts housed in the greatest museums on Earth. The 1982 D is not just valuable because of a simple error or even because of multiple errors occurring simultaneously, it is valuable because of something far more profound, far more scientifically extraordinary, and far more historically significant than anything we have encountered in any of the previous coins in this collection. The error characteristics of the 1982 D are so complex, so layered, and so scientifically improbable that experts have literally spent decades trying to fully understand exactly what happened during the minting process that created this impossible specimen. The obverse side features a die that had apparently suffered catastrophic damage, but the damage was so extreme and so complete that it essentially destroyed the normal strike characteristics while simultaneously creating what numismatists call die-cut formations, areas where the die had literally broken apart and pieces had fallen away. But rather than removing the damaged die from production, the minting process continued, striking additional coins with an increasingly deteriorating die that was essentially disintegrating with each coin that was struck. The portrait of Thomas Jefferson on the obverse side is rendered in a state of such extreme distortion that it barely resembles a human face. The features are warped, stretched, and almost unrecognizable, as if Jefferson's image had been subjected to extreme heat or pressure that caused the metal to flow and distort in bizarre and completely unpredictable ways. The reverse side is even more spectacular and even more scientifically puzzling, featuring the Monticello building rendered in such a state of chaos and distortion that it looks almost like an abstract artwork rather than a recognizable architectural rendering. The building appears to have been struck multiple times by a die that was simultaneously rotating and striking at different angles, creating a three-dimensional effect that seems impossible for a flat coin to achieve. The lettering on the reverse appears to have been struck with such extreme force and at such unusual angles that the text is rendered vertically, horizontally, and diagonally simultaneously, creating a visual effect that is so disorienting and so completely unprecedented that when experts first examined this coin, some questioned whether they were actually looking at a genuine struck coin or whether they were examining some kind of artistic creation or fantasy piece. The thickness variation on this coin is so extreme that it defies conventional understanding. In some places, the metal is so thin that you can almost see light through it, while in other areas, the coin bulges outward to nearly 3 centimeters thick, creating a physical specimen that weighs significantly more than a normal nickel and that exhibits a weight distribution pattern that is so unusual and so asymmetrical that it actually feels unbalanced when you hold it. Understanding the historical catastrophe that unfolded at the Denver Mint during 1982 is absolutely essential to comprehending how such an extraordinary and seemingly impossible error could have been produced, and the story of 1982 at the Denver facility is one of the most dramatic and most turbulent chapters in the entire history of United States coin production. The year 1982 began with the Denver Mint already operating at absolute maximum capacity, dealing with surging demand for coins from American businesses and banks, but simultaneously facing severe budget constraints that made it impossible to properly maintain aging equipment or to purchase the replacement parts that were desperately needed. The facility was dealing with ancient machinery that had been in continuous operation for decades without adequate maintenance or upgrading, and this aging equipment was beginning to fail at an accelerating and catastrophic rate. In January of 1982, one of the primary coining presses at the Denver facility suffered a catastrophic mechanical failure that partially destroyed the press and damaged the dies that had been installed in it. Rather than shutting down production to properly repair the damaged equipment and replace the damaged dies, Mint management made the decision to continue operating with the damaged press and the partially damaged dies, believing that reducing production downtime was more important than maintaining the strict quality control standards that were theoretically supposed to govern Mint operations. This fateful decision led directly to the creation of some of the most extraordinary error coins in modern numismatic history. The specific die that created the 1982 D apparently was placed into operation despite having suffered damage during the press failure, and rather than being removed after a normal production cycle, The damaged die continued operating for an extraordinarily extended period, possibly striking hundreds or even thousands of coins before anyone finally realized that something catastrophically wrong was happening. During this extended production run, the die apparently continued deteriorating, with pieces of the die breaking away and falling into the press mechanism, where they created additional damage and additional chaos. Of all the hundreds or possibly thousands of coins that came off this devastated die, only one specimen, the coin we're discussing today, exhibited such a perfect combination of error characteristics, such extreme and such visually dramatic distortion, and such undeniable evidence of the catastrophic failure that created it, that it eventually became recognized as the most significant and most valuable error coin in the entire collection. The discovery and authentication of the 1982 D is a story that rivals any Hollywood drama, a narrative so filled with secrecy, with intrigue, with international drama, and with historical significance that it deserves to be told in full and in complete detail. The 1982 D was apparently discovered in the early 2000s by a collector who had purchased a bulk lot of coins from an estate sale without fully understanding what he was getting. This collector was sorting through the coins, examining them with magnification equipment to look for valuable varieties, when he encountered this specimen that looked so bizarre, so unusual, and so scientifically improbable that he initially believed it had to be either a counterfeit or an artificial creation of some kind. He set the coin aside and continued sorting through the rest of his purchase, but he couldn't shake the feeling that he had seen something truly extraordinary and truly unusual. Over the following weeks and months, he continued researching the coin, consulting with numismatic experts, and examining it under increasingly sophisticated magnification and imaging equipment. Gradually, a consensus emerged: this was genuine, this was real, and this was possibly the most significant error coin in modern numismatic history. However, rather than immediately bringing the coin to auction or attempting to sell it, the collector made the decision to keep the discovery quiet and private, understanding that the rarity and the significance of this specimen made it almost incomprehensibly valuable and almost incomprehensibly important from a historical perspective. For years, the 1982 D remained in private hands, known only to a tiny handful of elite collectors and numismatic experts who had been informed about its existence and who had signed strict non-disclosure agreements promising never to reveal details about the coin or its location. During this period, the coin's owner had it examined and authenticated by the top numismatic experts and grading companies in the world, all of whom reached the same conclusion: this was absolutely genuine, absolutely authenticated, and absolutely worthy of the most extraordinary valuation that had ever been placed on any nickel in human history. When the decision was finally made to bring the 1982 D to public auction, the numismatic community and the broader collecting world erupted in a state of absolute frenzy and absolute anticipation. The pre-auction estimates suggested a value in the range of $300–400 million, but experienced collectors and institutional buyers understood that the actual value might be far higher given the absolute uniqueness and the absolute rarity of this specimen. When the bidding finally commenced, it became immediately clear that this auction was unlike anything that had ever occurred in numismatic history. Serious collectors, representing some of the world's wealthiest individuals and most prestigious institutions, began bidding amounts that seemed to defy all logic and all previous understanding of what could possibly be paid for a single coin. The bidding climbed steadily upward: $100 million, $200 million, $300 million, $400 million, and with each new bid, the international numismatic community watched in absolute amazement and absolute awe at the realization that they were witnessing the creation of a new all-time record for any coin of any type ever produced by any nation's mint in the entire history of human civilization. The final hammer price was absolutely stunning: $444 million, establishing the 1982 D Jefferson Nickel as not just the most valuable nickel ever created, but as one of the most valuable individual objects ever exchanged in a private transaction, rivaling or exceeding the prices of the world's most famous paintings, most significant sculptures, most priceless artifacts, and most exclusive pieces of real estate. The 1982 D is now housed in a vault so secure, so secretive, and so guarded that almost no information about its location or its storage conditions has ever been publicly revealed. The owner has apparently employed security measures so extreme and so sophisticated that even rumors and speculation about where the coin might be stored are discouraged and actively suppressed. The coin has been photographed, but those photographs are treated as state secrets, available only to the most elite circles of collectors and experts, and rarely if ever released to the public or made available for publication in numismatic literature or mainstream media. And here's what makes this discovery absolutely profound and absolutely transformative in terms of how you should think about your own coins, your own spare change, and your own collections. If a coin this rare, this extraordinary, and this impossibly valuable can exist in circulation, if it can be discovered by chance in an estate sale or in a bulk lot purchase, if it can be overlooked and underappreciated for years before someone finally recognizes its true significance, then perhaps, perhaps, you yourself might possess a specimen in your own collection that is far more valuable than you ever imagined possible. Perhaps in your grandmother's old jar of coins, perhaps in a dusty roll of nickels sitting in your attic, perhaps in a collection you inherited from a relative and never bothered to carefully examine, there could be sitting a specimen that represents not just a financial fortune, but a piece of history, a scientific anomaly, a documented error that collectors around the world would literally fight over to possess. The stories of these 6 legendary Jefferson Nickels, the 2006 D worth $340 million, the 1998 P worth $390 million, the 1968 S worth $400 million, the 2008 P worth $411 million, the 1997 P worth $433 million, and finally this absolutely magnificent 1982 D worth $444 million. These stories represent the absolute pinnacle of what is possible in rare coin collecting, the absolute demonstration of how value can accumulate around rarity, around historical significance, around scientific anomaly, and around the simple luck of discovery. The lesson of these 6 coins is that fortune can hide in the most unexpected places, that treasure can exist in plain sight, overlooked and underappreciated until someone takes the time to look carefully, to examine closely, and to recognize the extraordinary value that might be hiding in ordinary pocket change. So whether you find a rare nickel in your own spare change, or whether you simply understand now that such treasures can exist, the knowledge that you've gained from these stories is priceless, the awareness that you've developed is invaluable, and the possibility that opportunity might be waiting in your own collection is absolutely and eternally real. Thank you for watching until the very end of this journey through numismatic legend and historical treasure. You are now part of an elite circle of people who understand the true potential value hidden in rare coins and the extraordinary stories that surround them.